A recent survey finds that nearly 1 in 3 of us is struggling to make the rent or pay the mortgage or knows someone who has in the past year. As you might expect, it's an issue most keenly felt right in the heart of the city, where 42 eviction notices every day are being filed in housing court. This hour, in the special edition of the program, we raise the roof on housing, we track down landlords, and we look for answers.
Lost my job. I went a few months late on my rent.
I'm late on my rent, so I'm getting evicted. My car had broke down, and I needed a car to get back and forth to work, so I went and got a car payment and was late on my rent.
I'm here today because I haven't been served, but they said that they served me for an eviction.
I was in a car accident on September 25th, so I haven't paid November or December, and they're going to evict me, or at least they're threatening to evict me.
Well, I didn't pay my rent because I wanted them to come fix some things in the house, and even my water even got cut off due to their part.
My income used to be good with the old employment that I had, but the new employment I have now, I'm getting paid $8 an hour. So it's not really enough to be able to afford that and a car payment.
Because I was homeless for a couple of months. And so my mother-in-law went and got my son's Social Security, which is causing my rent to be delayed. And they all know this.
They didn't even do what they needed to do.
This is the thing, falling apart. And he knows that, and I've been telling him since we moved in there.
Oh, it's annoying at this point.
I was given time to not only talk to an attorney, but to negotiate with the landlord.
In a week, there's no way that I'm gonna come up with, they say I owe $2,000.
I don't want no eviction on my record, so hopefully that they can take that off.
Finding a home is almost impossible at this point, outside of taking my 15-month-old daughter and wife to a weekly hotel or motel.
I just have to find a place for me and my kids to stay. That's all I can do.
Some of the local faces and voices of eviction. Tonight, KCPT begins a 6-month reporting project on housing.
Parts of the city are in crisis when it comes to eviction. Creeping gentrification as well, driving up house prices perhaps, which is good for house owners, but also driving out low-income families. Where do they move to?
From evictions to gentrification, to the fight over apartments, to the pricing out of workers in downtown's housing boom. But we begin at the Plaza Library, where we brought together landlords and those who have been evicted, with legal and housing experts, and you.
We do not have to have this going on.
Living in an apartment that was infested by roaches and rats.
Landlords hate evictions. They're horrible.
It's a story about a failing system.
I've sat on the couch with somebody looking at their 72-inch Rent-A-Center TV talking about, it's real.
This is actually turning not into a public television program. This is now a reality show, ladies and gentlemen.
Support for this program is provided by the Healthcare Foundation of Greater Kansas City, the law firm of Hush Blackwell. Additional support comes from Dave and Jamie Cummings, Smithfield Foods, Haas and Wilkerson Insurance, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
It's very appropriate that we have Nick Haynes here tonight because he was evicted from Wales. We're always happy to partner with Nick Haynes.
Crosby, thank you so much for that incredibly true and not fake news introduction. It is so gratifying, ladies and gentlemen, that you think about all the topics that we could be dealing with in this community, and we said we're going to tackle housing and eviction, and we get more than 600 RSVPs. And I know over there you're uncomfortable because you're standing, but what an incredible problem that people care enough about this issue that there is standing room only at the library to hear about it. So thank you. We're about all audience engagement too, and let me tell you, it is very important to me, and this lady over here told me, you're in for an earful tonight. I love to engage with audiences, and that's going to be a big part of our program. Let's get straight to it and introduce our panel. With us today, we're thrilled to have Tara Raghuveer, who is the Harvard educated researcher whose comprehensive examinations of evictions in Kansas City is cited in the recent best-selling Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Evicted, by Matthew Desmond. She now works on housing policy for the People's Action Institute in Chicago. Terence Weiss is with us. He has first-hand knowledge of what eviction means and what its impact is on families. He was evicted. Professor Jacob Wagner is right over here. He examines the wider implications of all of this. He is the Director of Urban Studies and co-founder of the Center for Neighborhoods at UMKC. Gina Kiala left private law practice to help provide legal aid to low-income Kansas Cityans. She's the founder of the Heartland Center for Jobs and Freedom. And you can't talk about evictions without talking about landlords. Chuck Schmitz is a landlord. He is the former president of Landlords, Inc. of Kansas City. And to our right is Dan Kelly, an attorney specializing in landlord-tenant law. He's a board member with Landlords, Inc., the organization that advocates for the interests of landlords in Kansas City. But I want to pour through some of the data with Tara Ragavia, first of all, what you have actually learned along the way that helps set up our conversation. First of all, Matthew Desmond, and the book is right here, when he did the book Evicted, that became the bestseller, looked at the city of Milwaukee and really dug deep into what was happening in the city of Milwaukee. You focused on Kansas City. Why?
I grew up in Kansas City. I love this city, and I studied with Matthew Desmond in college. I was confused about why all the literature I was reading was about public housing and project-based housing, and for the most part, it was written in the 1980s. So when I read Matthew Desmond's then dissertation, which was about the private rental market, I had kind of a light bulb moment because I understood that that was actually the venue where people who have the hardest time finding housing are now housed. So I went to him at school and I asked him basically if I could replicate his study in Kansas City, and he said yes. And 5 years later, this is the issue that keeps me up at night.
But you pour through more than 173,000 eviction records right here in Jackson County over a 17-year period. This is one of the largest examinations ever done of an individual city in the country. What do you actually discover, Tara?
What we find is a bleak story. Just at those formal filings, we get to a crude average of about 42 evictions filed per business day in Jackson County alone.
42 every single business day, which is why, by the way, on this blue door behind us is the number 42.
So 42 filings per business day, and then we've done some further analysis on what actually happens in court, which gets us at another approximation of about 25 eviction judgments made per business day. So literally the judge says a person is evicted 25 times per day. And I think it's really important when we're talking about these numbers that we understand, of course, that they aren't numbers, they're people. Right? There are humans and families who are impacted by every single one of those judgments. And I think it's really critical whenever we're talking about the numbers, and I'm the one who brought the numbers, right? But I'm also the first one who will tell you that any data that we have on this problem is limited because it only captures the formal evictions that make it to landlord-tenant court. There are many, many more that happen informally, outside of the courts, and with no data to represent them. So the number 42, I think, is very conservative. And beyond the numbers, the data also tell a pretty bleak story about who's actually impacted in this city. There's a disproportionate impact on poor people and people of color in Kansas City. And when my team ran a multivariate analysis, what we found was that even when we hold income constant, race is the biggest predictive factor that tells you whether or not someone will be evicted in Kansas City.
Tara is articulating all of the statistics, but as she points out, this is about human lives, lives like Terence Weiss. If you're working full-time, you found yourself evicted, you and your family.
You know, I'm a 38-year-old fast food worker. I've had 20 years of experience in the industry, and not only that, my fiance Mo is a home health care worker. So these are two individuals that are up working hard every day. And to experience evictions With my 3 girls, it's just been traumatizing. And we're among the 64 million in this country that make less than $15 an hour. And there's a series of things, y'all, that lead to eviction, a series of things. We can have our hours cut at work, which I've had experience with in the past, going to work, working 18 to 40 hours a week, and then going in 1 week and only getting 20 hours. Can you imagine your income cut in half and what that does?
When you were evicted, what happened to you and your family?
One of my earliest experiences with eviction was simply living in an apartment that was infested by roaches and rats. It had a rat infestation. And at that time, me and my fiance refused to pay the rent until it was fixed. And it never was, and we were eventually evicted. We didn't know anything about it. And even more recently, in 2015, renting a home. I'd lived in apartments my whole life, so to have a home for my fiance and my 3 girls, never had one growing up, renting that, and to be evicted from that property for being $200 behind on rent. And it's worse than that. Coming home from work after picking up the kids from daycare to find all of our belongings, everything on the curb, out in the rain, and the locks changed, which forced us to sleep out of our minivan. Ironically, right in front of my job is where we slept inside of our vehicle. Me, adult man, cool. Me with my family and my 3 girls, and the way it has traumatized them even till today, it's something that none of our children should ever have to go through.
Gina, you gave up private law to help people just like Terrence, but this is not an isolated case.
The data that Tara talked about is exactly in line with what we see in the courts every day. There are huge numbers of tenants who are facing evictions and they don't have access to counsel. Many of them aren't coming to court, and those that do come to court don't know the procedures. Of course, nobody knows the procedures unless you've been trained on those. And because of that, they're not able to raise defenses, and they're not able to engage in other possible solutions that would help them avoid those evictions. I've looked at the case that Terrence had, and I believe that had he had access to counsel at that time, we probably could have counseled him and figured out a way to avoid that eviction. I would also mention that I helped Terrence earlier this year when his landlord sued him and he wasn't behind on the rent. There was just a mix-up in the paperwork. We were able to get that case dismissed, but had he not had legal counsel, he may have ended up evicted for that.
Tara, is Kansas City, though, any worse than anywhere else in the country?
So at this point, it's really hard to say. And anyone who says that Kansas City is or isn't worse than another city really isn't telling you the truth, because the problem is just so understudied. Matthew Desmond calls eviction the most understudied problem contributing to the reproduction of urban poverty. So I sort of punted on your question, but my analysis after looking at my research and studying the rest of the country is that Kansas City is actually not the exception.
But Jacob, over at UMKC, aren't we supposed to be one of the most affordable cities in America? So why are we having this problem here?
Because market conditions change dramatically, rapidly, very quickly. We've seen quite a bit of interest in folks moving back into the city. We see an increase in speculation on property that would drive up the cost to maintain and buy and sell properties. So we see costs going up while the issue of wages is not keeping pace with the changing housing conditions. It'd be one thing if the wages were keeping up with the situation, but they're simply not. That, in addition to, we've been investing in demolition for the last 10 years or more. We continue to spend money on demolishing housing, not replacing one-to-one those units we're demolishing. So we have less housing stock, and the stock that we do see come online is more expensive and obviously aimed towards the market. There are key issues around public subsidies, but that would require people to take my class at UMKC to talk about that.
And who can afford that these days, ladies and gentlemen? Chuck Schmitz over at Landlords, Inc., you are a landlord. I mean, I don't know if you fit the stereotype of one.
Sometimes I ask people to close your eyes and think the word landlord, and the image that comes to your mind, it's Mr. Potter from It's a Wonderful Life, or, the guy with the big ball of keys on his belt. But it's easy to demonize landlords. But we, in this economy, we need landlords and we need rental property.
You're not in the charity business, you're not in the nonprofit business, but when you're hearing about 42 eviction notices in Kansas City every single business day, something is going terribly wrong here, isn't it, Dan?
I think the biggest issue for that is economic. I think $15 minimum wage would solve most of the eviction problems in Kansas City. But I think it's important to keep in mind that it is just an economic issue. I don't know if you meant to the implication that white people aren't being evicted when they're not paying their rent. If anybody doesn't pay their rent, the landlord is going to evict them. It's a circumstance that happens to be more black people, but white people aren't living rent-free in Kansas City.
So you're saying this is not a race issue, but this is a non-payment of rent issue as to why people are being evicted. What are the reasons? You looked at all of the reasons. Is it just non-payment of rent as to why people are being evicted, Tara?
Yeah, I'd love the opportunity to respond quickly. The implication that I was trying to make, and maybe not clearly enough, is that when we hold income constant, still disproportionately, eviction is affecting black and brown people in this city, and that's when we hold income constant. To your question, the vast majority of eviction cases that make it to the landlord-tenant court are non-payment of rent cases. Not all of them, but I think we have to understand this in the context of an affordable housing crisis that is really national. In the United States, in 2017, there's not a single county where a person earning minimum wage and working full-time can afford a two-bedroom apartment. I think the thing that I've started to understand is this is not a story about all landlords being bad and all tenants being good or right. It's a story about a failing system. It requires a government solution, and the government has failed us.
Chuck.
Terrence's eviction was illegal. If you're just $200 behind and you didn't get notice, that's not a legal eviction.
But you didn't get any help. You didn't know what your rights were. Is that the case,
And
Terrence?
that's why another thing I feel strongly about, tenants need access to counsel. They need access to counsel. And like Gina mentioned, she stepped in for us last year to clear up a mix-up, but to have it happen just again at the end of December, deputy knocking on my door, only to be a mistake again.
Okay, let's go. I want to take your questions. We're going to bring the microphone out in a moment because I really want to get to you. But let's just understand a little bit of how this works, and we'll pull this a little bit more. What notice, first of all, let's understand how it actually works. What notice does a landlord actually have to give before they can evict a tenant?
In Missouri, it's different than Kansas, but in Missouri, there's no notice that's required.
None at all?
If you're behind on your rent and the landlord has asked you for the rent and you haven't paid it, he can file an eviction.
Now, Tara mentions the 42 eviction notices in the housing court every business day. Do you have to go to court to evict somebody from a property? Is that a requirement?
It is. In order to...
But the tenant doesn't know that.
I don't know what the tenants know and what they don't know.
Okay. That's fair enough. He's out representing landlords. Gina, I mean, would the tenant know?
One of the missions of our organization is to get out in the community and provide tenants with the information that they need to enforce and protect their rights. Because just like everybody else, if you're not a lawyer and you haven't gone to law school, you would have no reason to know those rights unless someone is out there doing the outreach.
Okay, Tara.
So legally, a landlord, when they're evicting a tenant, has to take the tenant to court. In my qualitative research, I spent time and built relationships with both landlords and tenants, and both parties informed me that a lot of evictions don't ever touch the court system. Landlords themselves told me stories of taking doors off of apartments, turning heat and water off. One landlord told me, and I quote, "Oh, I shouldn't tell you, I bring a revolver around with me. Her name's Maggie. And if anyone gives me trouble, like if I need someone to be out and they're not cooperating, I'll just give them a peek. Nothing too bad, just a peek." So it's these types of threats and self-help evictions that are rampant. So the informal...
So what is your perspective on that, Chuck Schmitz? Are you horrified to hear those types of scenarios laid
that
out
was
to
an
you?
old technique that landlords would laugh about that they would do in the 50s to take the doors off.
I wasn't born.
Well, I am not aware of any landlord that's done that. But it might be helpful to walk through the eviction process. I mean, typically, there's a lease and a contract, and the rent's due on the 1st. And most landlords will say, I'll give you notice that you're late. It's due on the 1st. I don't have it on the 5th, I'm going to let you know. And then they would wait till the 10th or the middle of the month and before they would file an eviction. One of the reasons that landlords file quickly is that it takes a long, long time to get someone out.
But it didn't require any notice. So I was thinking this was a fast process. How long does this take?
You file the eviction, you usually get a court date within 28 days of when you file it. And then you go to court. If the tenant asks for a trial, they'll be given a trial. And that can be anywhere from a week to 3 weeks from the original court date. So now you're looking at 7 weeks. If you get your judgment at 7 weeks, they have 10 days where they can appeal, where they can pay the judgment, and then they won't be evicted. After those 10 days expire, you can file a writ with the sheriff's department, and they generally take 10 to 20 days to come out and post the property and say, we're coming out to put your stuff out. And then within 48 hours of it being posted, they'll come to put your stuff out. So you're looking at 2.5 months without any rent during an eviction process.
So that's why landlords file, one of the reasons they file quickly is that it takes a long time. Second thing I want to say is landlords hate evictions. They're horrible. And the landlords in the room, would second that. I lose tons of money. Most landlords that in our organization, especially newbies, will give people another month or two. Sometimes they're 6 months behind on rent by the time the tenant's out. And then the tenant might be living in the house, not taking care of it for that time. And it's a painful process to go down to court. Most landlords know that it's a very bad thing. I'm glad we're having this discussion.
Gina.
The process actually moves extremely fast. It's unfortunately.
You wouldn't think that if it was your money.
Well, we're talking about housing here. We're talking about shelter. We're talking about putting families like Terrence's out on the street. So I would talk like that. And I think we should all be concerned about the speed with which these cases are happening. When the tenant receives the summons, typically they have about a week before they have to get to court. And we're talking about people who may work 2 jobs and need to try to figure out how they're going to miss work and get to court. It's not easy.
We hear about the eviction. Who does the actual eviction? Terrence, you went through this, not just once, but more than once. Who actually is doing the evicting?
Well, I can tell you, even the revolver thing really isn't quite funny, because one of my landlords was a elderly lady, and she actually sent her kids over, her sons, to intimidate, and they were actually the ones that hauled all of my stuff out of my house.
So it wasn't like a sheriff's deputy?
Oh, no.
Okay. Because we see the image behind us, you see law enforcement there. You get the impression this is law enforcement that does this, but that's not always the case.
According to law, it should be, but those are unlawful.
Well, Dan, what happens is the deputy from civil process meets the landlord at the property, but he doesn't provide any labor. The landlord has to provide the labor, but he stays there and keeps the peace while the locks get changed and the property gets removed.
Tara.
So I'm glad we're talking about the formal process. This is the stuff that we actually have data on. So what the data tell us is that tenants 70% of the time don't show up to court. They sort of know what's going to happen when they show up to court, or they don't even know that they're being evicted. When they do show up, tenants are represented 1.3% of the time by counsel, whereas landlords are represented 84% of the time. When a case makes it to the landlord-tenant docket, there is a 99.8% win rate for the landlords and a 0.2% win rate for the tenants.
I'd just like to point out that an absolute defense to any eviction is to pay your rent in full. And that's why people aren't showing up, because they know I don't have the money. And if I go and I say I don't have the money, I'm going to get a judgment against me. And that's why the landlords are getting so many evictions.
Madam, you've been incredibly patient. We are thirsting for your question.
I have several questions. And my heart is pounding. I was a housing counselor from 2008 to 2013 in Denver, Colorado. There was a tenant-landlord line we could give people to get information. Is there any such thing like that here?
That's something that the Heartland Center for Jobs and Freedom has started. And we need the help of the audience, and we're thankful to be on this panel so that we can get the word out.
I have a question for this gentleman. What percentage of your income goes towards your rent?
Well, I don't have a fair answer of what percentage of my income goes to my rent, but we're here as community.
Okay, the reason I'm asking this
Yeah.
question is I'm from the mortgage industry. You have to show the ability to repay. That if somebody's going to rent a property, they have to be able to pay the rent.
I understand what you're saying, and I understand the gentleman up front's frustration when he said, what if it was your money? We're not in a debate about that.
Let him answer.
And I just want to say that we want to pay our rent. Everyone in this room wants to pay their rent. I'm sorry.
Let him respond.
I'm sorry. And I know you have a family that you have to take care of and that you're responsible for. But all we expect from our landlords, seriously, is number one, respect, clean living quarters that are maintained. Simply put, I'm not on the panel to ask for free rent.
The reason I'm asking you this is for your protection. It's all a housing
Madam,
issue.
I totally love your passion. I know your heart is pounding. We've got so many people. We have to be respectful. Thank you. You've been an incredible job.
That's a good point.
Where's the affordable housing?
Because we don't invest in affordable housing as a society, as a state, as a city compared to the amount of need, right? So this is clearly a critical issue. It's not just these guys over here that are feeling the heat. We have shifted the public policy responsibility to the private sector, so they now have a much larger challenge in terms of providing the stock, providing the units that used to be publicly provided. We've gone a completely different direction as a society from providing affordable housing.
Gina.
Very quickly, I just wanted to note also that similar to how our legislature has preempted cities from being able to raise the minimum wage, our legislature has also preempted cities from being able to engage in rent control. So that's one policy that we don't have because of the legislature's policy decision there.
Okay, so we have pithy, one questions from our fabulous audience, and it comes next from you, madam. Thank you.
Right now in the property where I am, I have all kinds of issues with maintenance, and there's no power for me to actually force those to happen.
Can she withhold rent to force the landlord to fix those? Is that allowed by the law?
By state law, if you've been a tenant for 6 months and you've paid your rent and you're not behind on your rent, you're allowed to withhold 1/2 of 1 month's rent and spend that money on maintenance issues.
Gina.
We don't suggest that any tenant ever withhold rent without getting legal counsel first.
So how do we actually access your facility?
Low-wage workers are free to call us and contact us, and if you're not a low-wage worker, we may be able to give you a referral. Do you want our phone number? 816-278-1092. We also have a website that has a section on it on tenants' rights, and so that is www.jobsandfreedom.org.
My question to you is, what is a bad landlord? As with tenants, we have the court proceedings, and then they get that permanent record that they were evicted. Does that go on the record of the landlord, like a bad landlord, repeated revolving door evictions, making money? Is there data on that? Do you see that? Or shouldn't this be a process that goes both ways? Like it goes on my record, so it goes on your record as well, because we both participated in this process.
Is there some database of bad landlords out there, Chuck Schmitz, that you look at and you have in your building and you scornfully look at these people every day when you get your coffee in the morning?
You know, on Zillow, you can rate your landlord. And I suspect that there will be landlord rating sites of that sort that will evolve very quickly. I just want to say, people think that landlords benefit from evicting. We don't. It's a horrible process. It costs us money. I got to pay Dan. This is my apartment that I worked really hard to make nice, and I've got a tenant trapped in there for 2 months who's going to be angry at me for evicting them. There's going to be holes in the walls. There's going to be things torn up. There's no benefit to me to evicting someone except to get them out so I can get someone in who's going to pay. That's the only benefit to me. You can't, I've heard people say, well, there's landlords that make a living evicting people. Somebody tell me how you do that, because you can't make a living continually evicting people. I mean,
This is actually turning not into a public television program. This is now a reality show, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, Tara.
So we do actually have a list. Evictions are part of the public record. So in my data set, what we've been able to do is see the plaintiffs that show up time and time again. And there are some individual landlords who float to the top of our list, competing with major property management companies who do seem to rely on evictions as part of their business model.
More audience questions from the Truman Forum at the Plaza Library straight ahead. You're watching Evicted in Kansas City, but first, who's hurt most by evictions? What about children? Two mothers who found themselves at the City Union Mission tell their stories.
I tried to get housing, tried to get on with the Housing Authority, and found out it was a 3-year waiting list. I wound up taking one of the first places we could get. Thought it was an okay situation, turned out to be kind of a slumlord situation. She said there was heat and air, and summer hit, there was no air. And I wound up having a stroke. And while we were in the hospital, the landlord had changed the locks and dumped all our stuff. So we came out of the hospital, well, I came out of the hospital with no place to put my children. It's very, very scary as a child to not know where you're gonna sleep or where you're gonna eat, or if you're gonna have clean clothes when you're getting ready, you know, and if you're gonna be able to go to school.
It's been really, really hard being a single parent, and then you can't find a decent enough place for you and your kids to live in, and you have to deal with just these slum landlords just around that's just quick to take your money, but then not worried about how your living status is. Oh, it's been probably about 5 or 6 moves I've done.
In how many years?
In the last 5 to 6 years. They've had to go into different schools, and whenever we had to do those moves, and we had to end up in places like this, you know, shelters and stuff, it's kind of like their pride was gone. They didn't want, you know, my daughters were real rebellion towards me and everything because of having to be here, not understanding why they can't be in a house and had to live here.
My children were very afraid that they would lose their school, their friends, because of course that's their first priority is their friends and what their friends will think and do. Being in high school is hard enough, so the fact that they could go back there and be with the friends they'd already established and the teachers they know gave them a sense of normalcy. We were just one health problem away, you know, one bad car repair away from being here, and I have found so many others just like that, where some small difficulty has spiraled into becoming homeless, and where are my children and I going to be?
Sir, we're ready for your question.
Well, so much. First off, landlords doing repeated evictions are not making money, I assure you. They're perhaps giving people second chances because they're willing to lease to people that have evictions. On the 20th of this month, I had a tenant who I had texted, emailed, called, and still had not responded to, where is your rent? Okay? I'm begging her to let me know, to let me help her. Okay, but she's not responding. So if you bury your head in the sand, yes, I have to go do something. But it's not like I'm just going to file without having begged you for your rent.
Do you have a question too, or is it just the observation?
Well, yeah, my question to Tara is, I saw in your research that you stated the evictions cause the poverty and the perpetual cycle that it throws us into. I've said on the the couch with somebody looking at their 72-inch Rent-A-Center TV talking about, no, it's real. Okay. Have you looked at the tenants' choices that got them in the position to be evicted?
We got it. Thank you for your courage to say the question. What about that? People are making other choices.
I said it earlier, no one wants to not pay rent. It's not a battle between landlord and tenants. As community, we got to get to the root causes of why evictions are costing you, hurting my family, and how we're going to fix it. But I don't think poor choices is poor choices is the majority of a reason why we're not paying rent. I don't think that's a good one.
Eviction is actually a cause and a condition of poverty, right? Eviction causes poverty, but it throws the person who's evicted into a cycle. And an eviction is not just a forced move. An eviction has an impact on mental and physical health, has an impact on people's ability to reach their healthcare providers, transportation to their jobs. It has a big impact on kids' ability to stay in their seat in school, and they lose instruction time, right? An eviction then goes on someone's record, which makes it harder to rent again.
But harder to rent again, but not impossible to rent again, because we've heard from some landlords who say they're giving people second chances, Chuck.
I talked to a landlord that manages like 800 units. He said if someone files for an eviction, he does not consider that an eviction. Only when there's a judgment does he consider that an eviction. And if someone's been evicted, he probably won't rent to them for unless it was 10 years ago. The second thing is, just because someone's been evicted doesn't mean they were actually set out. I've set out one person in 15 years. The others, when we got to the unit and the sheriff was there, we unlocked the door, they were gone, and only their trash was left.
I am left wondering, though, with all of these people who are being evicted, though, what actually happens to them, Gina?
I think Terrence's story talks about what happens to them. People end up literally on the streets, they end up in homeless shelters. They end up crammed into family members' houses and straining those relationships. And I know many workers who, because they had that eviction on their record, ended up being in chronically homeless states for years on end. I can identify 2 workers right off the top of my head who spent 2 years with no stable housing because those evictions were on their records.
Sir, we're ready for your question.
Are there some economic policies that would at least help level the power disparity between tenants and landlords who make profits off of us simply living?
Tara.
And I think there are some policies that can be pursued in the system as it is. Some of those include rent regulations. Some of those include the mandatory construction of affordable units and mandates put on those units so that they remain affordable as times change, right? Some of those include an increased minimum wage so that we can solve some of the other parts of the equation. There's inclusionary zoning. There are taxes that we can put on some of the demolition and gentrification forces that affect our neighborhoods. We can tax demolition to help pay for new housing. I think there are all sorts of ideas, and I actually think Kansas City, starting with kind of a blank slate, has an amazing opportunity to lead the country in the direction of really just housing policy that no one is doing.
Do our landlords see themselves as part of that solution?
Most of the landlords I know, my clients, feel like they're providing houses, for the most part, that they would live in themselves. And yes, they do. They're not heartless people. They're waiting 4 or 5 months without any money, any income on that investment.
There was a solution that the Kansas City itself was proposing, which was a rental inspection program that was going to look at charging a fee to landlords.
Correct.
To have city inspectors come in and look at rental properties.
In 2007.
And didn't Landlords Inc., though, fight that?
We did. I don't know if you're surprised to know this or not, but Kansas City does have a rental inspection program currently in the ordinances. The city does not have the will or the money to do it. And we realized if they implement a system where the landlords are paying, they're still not going to have the will to go after the bad landlords. And what they're going to end up doing is getting revenue from the landlords that don't really need the inspections. And you're still going to have the landlords that don't do any repairs, and the city isn't going to pursue them at all.
I spent a lot of my personal time on this, and I called all over the country and hired a graduate student to help me research rental inspection programs. It sounds like a great thing. We'll go in every little rental house in Kansas City and we'll inspect it. We'll make sure it's safe and clean. And what I found was that the program started out strong and then they went down, and that the bad landlords figured out ways around it. And I'm not a giant, I got a dozen or so properties. It would cost me a week of my life to let the inspector in to the property and deal with all of that. So it's not the $25 fee. It's a huge burden on landlords, and I think that people on the council were worried about anything that would slow down
Tara.
growth.
Independence has an inspection ordinance and they've implemented it. It's fully funded. And the city manager has told me recently that he's having inspectors calling him personally to thank him for enforcing the inspection ordinance because some of the properties that they're inspecting are so uninhabitable.
All righty, sir, it is your time. Thanks for your patience.
I'm an attorney in Kansas City. I've been representing landlords for 42 years. I know there are a number of cities that have enacted everything you all are proposing. Tenants have every kind of protection you can imagine. You can't do an eviction in less than 6 months. The landlords are greatly regulated. There's only one little problem is you can't afford to live in any of those cities because what's that's done to the cost of housing. Boston, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Seattle. San Francisco, $2,000 a month will get you the backseat in somebody's car. All I'm saying here is be careful what you wish for.
We don't necessarily want to have the unintended consequences of rents going up, but we don't want to have units that are so substandard that they're a health problem. This is a classic challenge of governance, the classic challenge of how do we provide safe housing that's also affordable.
Chuck is a perfect example of that because he buys the apartment buildings that people complain about. He fixes them up. He gets awards from the governor for doing it, and it's no longer affordable housing. He can't rent it for less than, what, 800, 900 a year?
I'm exhibit A of why we have a housing problem. I bought a derelict building that was where people were living in there for $300 or $400 a month. And I moved them out, I fixed it up. It was a beautiful piece of architecture. It won the Missouri Historic Preservation Award. I went to Jefferson City, and got an award from the legislature. But the reality is I took 30 affordable housing units off the market. All the neighbors thanked me, are very happy about that. The neighborhood's excited. But as Jake said, we keep, that's just a natural thing that's going to happen in the city that's regentrifying.
It's not natural. So, right, it's political, right? So it's political and economic in the sense that we could create the policies to support what you're doing, but then, have ways to subsidize on the renter side so that they can come back to that unit. There are ways to address these issues, but it requires good research, proper understanding of policy, and the market changes that are happening. We don't have that investment in what's going on, let alone what are we then going to do to actually make housing affordable.
But just to be clear, I can't afford to rent that for $300 anymore. It's a $900.
I don't believe that there's a silver bullet solution to this problem. I don't think that regulation of the landlord industry alone is ever going to solve the massive crisis that we have across the country when it comes to housing. And you're right, sir, to say that New York and San Francisco, when it comes to housing, are kind of beyond help in some ways, right? Kansas City's not, but we will be if we don't implement innovative, just solutions now. And I think there are actually a lot of assets that this city has that bear mentioning, right? We have space, right? Drive around this city and it's not as dense as some of the other cities that are facing some of the problems that you talk about. We have homes, but some of them are not habitable, right? So I totally agree with Jake that a program that the city or the state or one day the federal government can do to subsidize the rehabilitation of rental units so that people can still afford to rent in habitable, safe, affordable apartments in this city, I think is one thing that could speak to that first asset. And the second asset that we have here in Kansas City that we can't take for granted is the concentration of philanthropic and private capital that in the world as it currently is needs to be leveraged in the direction of solving this critical problem.
Madam, you've been very patient. We're ready for you.
I came up short on my rent for 1 month. It went for $50 for the late charge and $5 a day. They filed the eviction charges. The notice was on my door to go to court in a week. And I know that this is what happens to a lot of people. After they slap on all those extra charges and everything and stuff, then you're always trying to play catch up, and then they want it by a certain time and you don't have it. So the statement that you're making about that it takes months for them to go through the process and stuff, I know that to be not a true statement. As the gentleman said, we want to pay our rent. Most people want to be able to pay their rent on time. Things happen sometimes, and I think maybe you guys need to start looking at it on an individual basis.
Okay, let's get a response from our landlords. Dan.
Okay. There are late fees and court costs that can be added to the amount, but to avoid eviction, all you have to do is pay your rent. If you pay your rent, you will not get a judgment for possession.
I want to continue on that conversation because we talked a little bit about some of the solutions, and Tara talked about some of those. But what actions can someone take to prevent an eviction?
The prospect of facing eviction is frightening, and that a lot of tenants, when they see that posting on their door, they assume the worst and oftentimes evict themselves without checking with an attorney first because they didn't have access to one. Now they can contact us.
But
can
if you
also
knew you were
contact
already
Legal Aid.
going to be falling back on the rent, is there anything you could be doing to help assist in that situation? Even our landlords, is there what?
Yes.
What?
If you agree to move out before the landlord files, you do not get an eviction on your
Okay,
rent.
well, for some people, obviously, that's not an option. But
They can communicate with their landlord.
he says communicate with the landlord. If somebody communicates with you and say, I can't pay the rent, do you say, tough luck, I'm sorry, I have to make my money too, and I'm looking to put gas in my car this week?
A small landlord, he's got a tenant who's been there for a long time, always paid, they get behind, you work with them. But a big operation has to have standards. You can't tell your property manager, if you like them, let them stay longer. You have to have a standard for everyone. And so most of the large property managers have a set in stone, cold sort of thing. Our landlords that have, a few properties and it's a part-time thing for them will often wait people out. Often they wait too long. And get behind.
I want to go through a couple of scenarios with you. Just get your yes or no reaction to them because they came up to us at the station. You're the landlord, your tenant reports you to the health department because of a mold problem in their unit that is caused by a roof leak you have not fixed. Can they be evicted?
They can't be evicted for complaining. If they're behind on their rent, they can be evicted, but they cannot be evicted for reporting a mold issue. There's two ways to evict someone in Missouri. One is the straight, you're behind on your rent, and that's probably 96% of the evictions. The other is for an action that the tenant takes. And if the tenant takes an action that violates one of the clauses in the lease or state law, then the landlord is required to give them a 10-day notice terminating the tenancy. And if they don't vacate within those 10 days, at that point, the landlord can file an unlawful detainment.
You're the landlord. A young couple moves into a 2-bedroom apartment in your property. You find out that the wife is pregnant. Well, you don't want a screaming newborn disrupting the other tenants. So you file to evict the couple. Is that legal?
No. Again, there has to be cause or they have to be behind on their rent. Plus, it's a fair housing violation. You'd face federal fines.
My question is, in 2007, 2008, they had a housing collapse, and millions of people got foreclosed. Did the influx of millions of homeowners who probably fell back onto the rental market cause rents? Did that cause an inflation in rental property, having all these ex-homeowners who are now renters coming into the market?
Tara?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much, sir. We're ready for you.
If we keep looking at it on a landlord-tenant issue, we lost anyway, because it's way bigger than that. 70% of the black people live east of Truce. Where the jobs at, though? Not east of Truce. So once you have to drive to Leawood, you're falling victim to all the police harassment. So when you think of the people that try to go work, they can't even work. Ain't nothing you gonna be able to do to save this landlord-tenant situation, short of reparations.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, we're going to take one more question here, and then I'm going to wrap it up. Yes, sir. Good to see you again.
Now, here's my question, Chuck. Out of all those properties that you have, is any of that hands-on? I mean, do you?
Oh, I show every apartment. Early on, I did all the maintenance myself.
In Oak Park alone, most of our landlords live in California. We have more vacant houses in the inner city than anybody. So when you evict somebody, that's another empty house.
It's easy to communicate with a Chuck Schmitz who lives in Kansas City, but many of these landlords, as you found out in your research, Tara, have no connection with Kansas City at all other than that they own the property here, right?
Right, and this relates to the gentleman's question from before, especially after the financial crash in 2008. A lot of the housing stock that was previously owner-occupied or at least owned by an in-state landlord has been bought up by speculators. So now it's managed by property management companies locally, but the owners either live somewhere out of state or they might still be in-state, but there's a rampant problem of property owners owning property under LLCs. So they all have these shadow companies. So even though I have the data that tells us who's sort of responsible for most of this problem, honestly, it's really hard to get even a semblance of an understanding of who the worst actors are, because all of the worst actors have all of these different LLCs that hide the actual footprint of their evictions in the city.
Okay, that's all we have time for in questions. I really appreciate you doing it. Thank you. I really have to move this on. I have to be very respectful of this huge audience's time. Thank you. Thank you. But I want to ask solutions. Can you come up with a solution, Dan, that we can take home with ourselves and feel like we can go to sleep a little better tonight thinking that there may be something?
I think the important thing is to get your council members to make the city neighborhood preservations knows who the bad actors are. They just don't have the will to shut them down or they take them to court, they give them a ticket, they'll issue a warrant, but that's where it ends. And they could do a lot more and they're not doing it.
Chuck Schmitz.
I'll second that. There's bad actors in the city. There's out-of-town landlords. There's bad management companies. There's that, it's a couple of bad apples spoil the mix. My second thing is we need more affordable housing. It's drying up very quickly, and we're going to have to do something about affordable housing in this city.
You at UMKC, Jacob Wagner.
Well, I wanted to support Mr. Pat Clark and make sure that, his point, which I think was he was heading, is we have to direct this to our political leadership at every level, and that we have to be careful in neighborhoods where there's already a ton of vacancy to directly look at the underlying causes of vacancy as well and make sure that people are not taking advantage and letting things go and letting existing housing stock just fall apart. So it involves codes, it involves community policing and engagement, and it involves that hands-on approach that I think Mr. Clark was trying to say. That's what we need to see in Kansas City is more engagement between landlords, neighborhoods, renters to work together to find better solutions. But if we don't have the city's housing department and some key legal advocacy, then it all kind of falls apart.
Tara.
I think we're facing a question around the country about who can continue to afford to live in American cities. I think as Kansas City grapples with that question, it is incumbent on our city leadership, the landlord community, the tenant community, and importantly, all of you, to take the issue of housing extremely seriously because it shapes how all of us live, even if we're not pressed to pay the rent. And I think it's incumbent on all of us then to demand of our elected leaders and all of the stakeholders in the community to put forward a comprehensive housing strategy that's going to make sure that tenants who are living in this city can stay in this city and live with dignity in safe and habitable places, and that we don't go the way of other cities like New York and San Francisco that have completely priced out people of color and poor people.
Terrence Weiss.
I say tonight it's great we're talking about housing, but let's be clear. We got to stand up and we got to fight to make change. Because if we continue to be divided, black, white, brown, Latino, Hispanic, native-born, foreign, if we don't come together and demand, it's more of us than it is landlords. It's more of us. We need to vote too as well. If we don't bring our power together and march in these streets of Kansas City and take it to the ballot box, if we don't build power and come together and organize, sister, you said you're an organizer. We got to organize in this city if we're going to win anything or get anywhere.
Thank
That's
you.
just
Gina.
I don't think I could say it any better than what Terrence just said and what Tara has stated as well. We need access to affordable housing. To get that, we've got to fight for it. Tenants need access to counsel, and we need $15 an hour for all workers.
Our thanks to Gina, Terrence, Tara, Jacob, Chuck, and Dan. And thanks to you for your excellent, passionate questions and for being caring enough about this issue that you wanted to be here tonight. Thank you very much from all of us here at KCPT and the Public Library. Good night.
Support for this program is provided by the Healthcare Foundation of Greater Kansas City, the law firm of Hush Blackwell. Additional support comes from Dave and Jamie Cummings, Smithfield Foods, Haas and Wilkerson Insurance, and by viewers like you. Thank you.